Hey, welcome, faithful politics listeners and watchers on YouTube. If you're joining us via YouTube, this is Josh Bertram, your faithful host for Faithful Politics. And we have with us, of course, our ever political, faithfully political, Will Wright. Hi, Will. How are you?
Hey, howdy ho.
Good, good, good. Glad to hear it. And today we have with us Michael W. Austin, who is a professor of philosophy at Eastern Kentucky University and a senior fellow at the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute, and Gregory L. Bock, an assistant professor of philosophy and religion and program director for the Philosophy, Religion, and Asian Studies program at the University of Texas at Tyler. And we're going to be talking with them about a book that they have edited, co-edited, called QAnon, Chaos, and the Cross. What a name. I'm looking forward to kind of digging in with that. But guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I got to ask you guys first, how did you get roped in to doing this? And what do philosophy professors like? How interested in you are you in conspiracy theories and chaos and things like that? Just help me figure that out. Maybe we can start with you, Mike.
Yeah, you bet. So actually, another friend of mine, a publisher, had approached him about writing a book on it. And so I said I was interested. And then I started thinking about it. And I was just like, I can't write a whole book on this. There's just too much for me. I just can't do it. Don't have enough knowledge and expertise, but I thought it's an important topic. So, and Greg and I think it was soon after that we started talking, and he's taught a class on this he can share about. But yeah, basically it comes from as Christian philosophers seeing some critical thinking lapses, and then also just real damage that's done by this stuff that can be done by it, both, relationships, churches, even in society, politics, all that stuff. So we felt like, rather than just me or the two of us writing something, we can get a bunch of different people from different fields and be more helpful resource for others.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Greg, what about you? How did you get into this, and what's your experience been like?
Well, initially, this was years ago. I've had friends who've believed in a lot of conspiracy theories, so had been having this ongoing conversation with people about conspiracy theories, specifically Christian friends who believe these things, and so it's concerned me, and it's just sent me down. When you know people who believe stuff like that, it hits close to home and sends you down your own personal journey, searching out the answers to these things. And so I started researching it, and then in my teaching, as Mike mentioned, I started to incorporate some of the cases, some of the conspiracy theories in my critical thinking, in my logic classes, just to make it more interesting, but also for my own sake, because I wanted to work through it myself on a semester by semester basis. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
So what's kind of? Go ahead, Will.
No, I was going to say so maybe we can just sort of set some ground. I don't know, just have a baseline for what is a conspiracy, because I think one person's conspiracy is another person's truth. So I don't know who would be best able to handle that.
Well said, Will. Well said.
Yeah, I'll start. I think we wanted a definition. Well, we didn't want a uniform definition that everybody used in the book. We wanted people to kind of come at it. But I think not all, but most of them, they're neutral, so to speak, about whether a particular conspiracy is true or not, right? So there's usually when we say conspiracy theory in our culture right now, people think of like, well, just outlandish or crazy or whatever, but real conspiracies happen, right? And so we want to be sensitive to that because that's reality. So I think, I think a good one is it's a group of people, usually small, right? They're doing something, usually in secret, right, to try to achieve some end, some goal of theirs. And I don't know, Greg's probably better at this definition. Maybe he can jump in and rescue me.
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I would say a good, like he said, there are many definitions proposed in the book, but I would say a good definition is one where you have an explanation of an event in terms of a small group, with nefarious intentions, working in secret against us. I think that's probably a pretty effective one. But there are chapters in the book that use a more broad definition, not necessarily nefarious intentions. It could be good intentions, but not when we use the term conspiracy theory, normally the connotation is something negative, right? But one of the chapters in the book is called
Yes.
All Christians Are Conspiracy Theorists. And one of the ideas he proposes in that chapter is that even the Trinity is a sort of conspiracy, right?
That's crazy. Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
Got you definitely got my attention, and I definitely want to follow up on that, because it was one of the questions I have in my notes about, why are all Christians conspiracy theorists. But I do want to address one thing that you put early on in the book, that you identified list of different types of conspiracy theories that are out there, like 9/11 was an inside job, or I can't remember some of the other ones you had, but you had one that actually caught my eye, because I follow the whole Russia thing fairly closely. I mean, I'm probably the only person on the planet that's not in politics that I've read the whole, like, 434 some odd pages of the Mueller report, and the Horowitz report, the Senate Intel Committee report. So you mentioned that the Russia interference in the 2016 election is a conspiracy theory. So I'm wondering if you can unpack that a little bit, because in my I don't know, study, reading of it, that there was some interference, not necessarily collusion per se, but there's some interference, and we don't have to spend the whole episode on this, but I just want to get sort of a point of clarification on that particular aspect.
Mike, you want to take that one?
No. Yeah, and that's actually just because it must have been one of the contributors, so, but I think that, look, it could have been a conspiracy. I don't, I haven't read it. I remember hearing about it a lot, in the politics, and I think I got tired of it. So I'm not sure, maybe one of the contributors mentioned it. I don't recall the chapter, but yeah, I think that could be a conspiracy. And then that would pose a problem when you make the definition small, just a small group of people, that's not always the case, right? If that was going on, it was probably a larger group trying to influence our elections. And it does seem like, right, the things that were done on social media and those kind of things. So there was a concerted effort, from memory, if memory serves, yeah.
So
No,
is it like,
it's fine.
is it like the idea of like Russia that because it was a smaller group of people trying to keep something hidden from a larger populace, and under that definition, Russia, their interference would count as a conspiracy theory? And I think one of the things that I see that you guys even try to do within this book is to kind of help demystify conspiracy theories to some extent. Like, a conspiracy theory can be true. Like you said, there have been true ones where people, that's the whole thing. Like Will said, one person's conspiracy theory is another person's truth. And so much of that has happened and things have come out. One of my questions for you guys, as you've processed through this, what has been kind of the biggest impact? Actually, you know what, dude? I got to go back to what you said, Greg, about the Trinity being a conspiracy. I'm sorry, before I can go anywhere else, I need you, Greg, to explain what that means in your own words.
Sure,
because
no problem.
That is amazing.
It wasn't my argument. This wasn't my idea. Again, being the editor of a collection, you've got all kinds of ideas in this book. But the author's point was that when we consider the definition of a conspiracy, it seems like what the plans of our God is one of those, would fit that definition. So you've got three persons.
Because they're mysterious?
They're three person. Okay. There's a redemptive plan in history. I mean, this gets into theology, which is way outside of my area, but when you talk about these three people, you could say conspiring from all eternity to pull off this plan, right? In that sense, it doesn't fit the definition of having there be some nefarious intention, right? It would be as Christians, we would say this is a good thing. Nevertheless, it does seem to be a secretive plan to some extent, and it awaits God's revelation for us to discover that. But then on the other side, in the same chapter, he gives another example where you've got in the Christian tradition the discussion of the devil and his minions. So there's another conspiracy. The devil's got this plan, and he's working in secret to do whatever it is he does. And so that fits the
Right.
definition, but that would be more fitting with the definition that I would think we would call a conspiracy theory because it has those negative connotations. And yes, it's a
Right.
matter of perspective, sure, but still you've got to have some sort of nefarious intention in it.
That makes yeah, that makes sense. Mike, did you want to add in something there?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about it because it sounds so weird to the ear, right? That God is there's this Divine Conspiracy, actually one of my favorite books by Dallas Willard, but it's kind of
Oh
making
yeah,
this
that
point
is.
about
You're right, dude.
yeah, about the kingdom of God. And but sometimes we talk about good conspiracies. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer part of a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, and that was, I mean, people argue about that, but you can make a case that that was in dire situations. Bonhoeffer thought that was in some sense, what he ought to do. So, yeah,
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
that all Christians are conspiracy theorists, then that kind of, without being explicit about the definition, it could cause trouble. Because what we're trying to do is say we're concerned about the bad kind of conspiracy theories, or the false ones, or
Right.
the clearly false ones that many people are buying into. And part of our concern there was we're concerned about the witness of the church. Like if I'm telling my next door neighbor, I believe Jesus actually rose from the dead, and also that Donald Trump is going to get all the Democrat entertainment and elite pedophiles and break that open. I'm
And there are
undermining my
lizard
credibility.
people. Don't forget the lizard people,
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah. I somehow missed that until the last few months. There's always new
We
elements
did
of
a
QAnon that
great
come out.
interview. We did a great interview with what was his last name? It was Rothschild, right?
Mike Rothschild, yeah.
Mike Rothschild about QAnon, and he is awesome. If you ever get a chance to talk to him or read his book, the what is it? The winter is coming, or the storm is. It's something like
Oh
it's
yeah,
something like that.
the
I
storm. That's a
totally
QAnon
butchered it.
thing. Yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah,
it's not my book. That's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, but
Yes,
you
absolutely.
know, on the same kind of in the same vein, because you guys so the first word in your book is QAnon. For those that have are coming into this new, or have never heard of the concept or listened to our episode with Mike Rothschild about QAnon, can you explain a little bit like who or what is QAnon? And
Yeah, so there's a 2017, I believe this started. So someone identified as Q, who's claims to have some kind of security clearance. It's not the highest level, but decent level of security clearance. Started dropping these ideas and claims on 4chan, internet, and then 8chan. But basically, the big picture idea is that there are a group of, just like child sex trafficking pedophiles, Democrats, entertainment, kind of elite or up people in the entertainment industry, Democrats, media. There's this big child sex trafficking ring. They're all pedophiles. And that, and then Trump comes into the picture. He's the one that's going to, he's secretly fighting against this. And there will be I think it's called the storm, which is when the truth will be revealed about all these people, and then the Great Awakening. Well, when these people will be arrested, and then the Great Awakening, I think it's called, when everybody will see that Q was right all along. And that can even lead into some of them. There's some kind of utopia that will follow in the U.S. after that. So that's the big picture. But now it's just this unwieldy, all kinds of things can get traced to Q or QAnon, and mutually contradictory claims. So it's like this amorphous thing, perpetrated through, not just word of mouth, but more online, social media, all that stuff.
And what makes that so, in my mind, I guess nefarious, maybe just because we said that earlier in the conversation, but what makes it so nefarious to me is that you can keep you can be totally anonymous, and people that have no clue what you think, you can be posting these crazy things, right? And people are believing it. And I don't know, how did you guys, how did you guys, like, when you were in the process of editing and process of working through all the material you had to work through to for this book, how did that make you feel about the state of like Christianity in America? And we can start with you, Greg. How did that make you feel about Christianity in America? And then we'll move to you, Mike. What were you left with?
Um, well, it's deeply concerning, right? I, I have and I've been a part of evangelical Christianity since my faith journey started, and identify strongly with it. It's deeply concerning when it seems like two problems arise. We've stopped thinking critically about claims that are made in society, like what you're talking about, and also we're not thinking as biblically as we could be or should be. So those are the concerns. Our hope with this book is that it provides a toolkit to help people in the church, really help them think through these issues critically. And that's, you mentioned earlier, why are philosophers getting involved in it? And this is exactly why, right? To think more carefully about what's going on, especially in the church. And this book is written by Christians for Christians. I mean, there are other books about conspiracy theories that I recommend as well, written to different audiences. But we're concerned particularly with it taking root in the church. So yeah, it is concerning. We remain hopeful. That's why we wrote the book. But at the same time, yeah, disturbing.
Man, I understand. Well said. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, it's just like I guess kind of dumbfounded and depressing because I had found some of the like survey or empirical data, and then other contributors did the same. So, there was a Lifeway survey in 2021 that 49% of Protestant pastors said they frequently hear members of their congregation attribute things happening in
Yes.
the U.S. to conspiracy theories. 60% of evangelical Republicans think I think Antifa was behind. Um, January 6th, and there's one more that really bothered me. Yeah, that evangelicals are the most
Really?
likely group. Well, the evangelicals are the most likely group to believe that the COVID vaccine was designed to get microchips in us. So, as one who's more skeptical of these things initially, my chapter's on humility. For me, the humility was I've got to try to meet these ideas and people where they're at, and not just dismiss them as crazy or uneducated, which is what an arrogant academic might often do, or just anybody that hears some of these claims. But
Right.
it looks like the data is that there's people education level doesn't correspond with it, right? Highly educated people, low educated people, very intelligent people, not intelligent people. I mean, just all, yeah, there's no sort of wheelhouse for QAnon. All looks like all people are vulnerable. So yeah, it's really disheartening. But yeah,
Yes.
I think
Very disturbing.
there's this anti-intellectualism in America that stream that's run through our history in many ways, and there's good things about it, right? Being, independent thinker, but when it goes astray, um, where we, instead of thinking logically, critically with our God-given gifts, we kind of just go with gut feeling or let emotions draw us. And emotions are good, but there is, well, as actually Dallas Willard often said, they're good servants but terrible masters, and I think that's right. So
Yes.
i do
Yes.
i do have hope, though, because I mean, things have happened like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, in any philosophy department in the United States or England, they were arguing about whether or not the word God actually meant anything. Like, things were so far that direction that if I said God, it was like saying a meaning, just like making a noise that made no sense. Whereas since the 60s, there's been a real renaissance of Christians in philosophy, to where you pick up any academic
Yeah.
journal,
Yeah.
there's something by a Christian, and a Christian who takes their faith
Wow.
seriously. So that's
Wow.
pretty incredible. I mean, you would have never.
Very incredible.
Yeah. So our hope is that there's people can, yeah, as Greg said, equip people to deal with this. And really what we want to do is equip people who know somebody who maybe is starting to get into this stuff or deeply in. They've got ways to engage
Me. I know people.
them.
I know people that are already engaged
Yeah.
in it. And
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? So the aim of the book, right, is to help to be a toolkit, right? Now, I would love for you guys to go into a little bit more of what you mean by that. I'm assuming, and Greg, we can start with you again. I'm assuming a toolkit would be some kind of intellectual tools that you can use, logic things like that, methods of logic that you can use to try to critically assess things. Go into what are those tools? How do we use them? And yeah, how do we think logically about things when we get our friend talking to us about lizard people?
Yes, that's great. The book is made up of contributors from all different disciplines, writing from biblical studies, philosophy, and communication studies, histories even in there as well. So you've got all kinds of things that make up the tools in the toolkit. But yes, epistemology, logic, critical thinking, that's all in there. My chapter is on anger. So I decided to take this opportunity to write. I have another research area on anger and forgiveness, so I wanted to bring the two together in this chapter.
Mm.
But I noticed that conspiracy theories, look at the videos of January 6th. I mean, they seem pretty angry, right? So I'm concerned that, how do we decide whether they've, when your anger has crossed a line? I'm not just talking about people who believe conspiracy theories, but also people on the other side who are upset that there are people believing this stuff or talking about this stuff in church. So it seems like we've got an anger problem in the church, and that's what my chapter is meant to address. But for those of you who want more of the practical, like critical thinking stuff, we do have an appendix at the end of the book that lists a number of logical fallacies and intellectual virtues in short form that can quickly be used as a reference just to guide somebody through some of these tough issues.
So talk to us a little bit real quick. Oh, sorry, Will. Go ahead.
Oh,
No.
I was trying to just maybe get a point of clarification because, so the book has both of your names on it, but based on, our conversation, it sounds like different contributors kind of wrote different chapters of the book. Is that fair assessment?
Yeah, that's right. So we each wrote a chapter, and then contributors that we got in touch with, or they sent us ideas, and then they wrote the chapter, and then we gave feedback. So, yeah, so there might be, I mean, there are things, I would say there are things in the book I don't necessarily agree with. I'm not going to say which things, but we think that's good because it's
Mm.
gives that broader view. And two, we wanted people, so there are people that in the book that are really like harsh against evangelicals, and look, I identify as one. It's sort of, I mean, I would nitpick about it and say a classic evangelical, like a Wilberforce or a John Stott, not, this sort of
Mm.
politicization of it in our
Yes.
culture. But
Yes.
but then but I think everybody's concerned about it and they take a different tack. And so yeah, it's just that's the idea. So then you bring the people with their expertise with feedback. I mean, yeah, our names are on it, but it's because we kind of put it together and helped refine the chapters. But each of the authors has their own voice. We didn't like censor or say you can't say this or because we don't agree. Let them
Yeah,
make their case and let people wade through it.
that's great. And I want to circle back to something that you said, Greg, earlier that really resonated with me because so I'm a Christian. I mean, I often say on the program that I have spent more of my life as an atheist than I have a Christian, but in sort of my Christian journey, I often get dismayed because I see the way that, the faith that I follow is portrayed in the media or, with events like January 6th or other things. And it really gets me frustrated because like in my mind, like I feel like my faith is going to make me a better person, so kind of as a result, like I would love it if other people had interest into my faith, but I don't blame them for not wanting to follow my faith because of what they see. I mean, I often get the questions like, hey, you're a Christian, do you believe in X, Y, or Z? I'm like, no, like I'm not the storm the Capitol type of Christian. I'm more the grace and love type. But I'm curious on why you think Christians are, I don't know, fertile ground for a QAnon type of ideology to take root in. I mean, I don't see a lot of, people that follow Islam or Buddhists or Catholics or, follow sort of this ideology. So do you have any thoughts on that, Greg?
I'm totally with you, Will, on on your concerns about the faith and what this is doing to the faith, right? Having to defend myself and my own views when people say, "Oh, you're a Christian, yeah, so you believe such and such." No, exactly not. But I think, yeah. What was your question again? Sorry.
No, it was more focused on why are Christians so gullible
Oh,
about QAnon
right.
philosophy.
Well, this would just be speculation on my part, but I think you can trace it back to just a larger problem of distrust in institutions in our society. Christians in particular, my concern in the evangelical church is that we've the close association over the last few decades of evangelicalism and right-wing politics, and the inability to distinguish the two. That's my concern. I've got conservative friends. I consider myself somewhat conservative, moderate. So there's nothing wrong, I think, with being a conservative, politically speaking, and being an evangelical Christian. But I think we have a problem of too closely identifying the two. And that's where I think part of this problem arises.
Got it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike? I mean, also as a believer, I'm assuming you probably do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is kind of a weird history in the U.S. I mean, I think the anti-intellectualism is part of it, and that the church has followed the culture, right? And sort of these sort of gut level things, letting fear and anxiety, those kind of things. But I think, look, there's a history of sort of weird speculative thinking, especially in the more this kind of faith tradition. So think of like all the end time stuff from the 70s till today, right? That I remember reading, what the Apache helicopters of the like 1970s are like the locusts in Revelation. I mean, just these weird parallels people will do, all the Left Behind stuff, and there's just a lot of thinking that goes beyond or even against the evidence. And then we're used to like, and sometimes I think it's the individualism too, like, which there's a good thing. We want authentic faith that's genuine from from our mind and our soul. But then we kind of see ourselves as the ultimate judges of truth. And when I read the New Testament, pursuit of truth and wisdom, it's much more of a communal thing, not an individual thing. So just because I feel strongly that God told me to do X, I need my community to affirm or not affirm that. And just because I feel strongly that, you know, there are lizard people running around my town right now, I need my community to help me, weigh the evidence. So yeah, we've got to just start doing the hard work of here's the arguments for, here are the arguments against, and let's weigh it out together. Knowing, I mean, as a philosopher, that's where I tend to go in first is the evidence and the arguments because that's what we do. But knowing too, humans, we're more than that. We're emotional beings. We're not just mental creatures or psychological. There's many facets and dimensions, so we want to address all that stuff. But yeah, I think really what Greg said. There's too much of our politics is upstream of our theology, and I didn't predict this going in, but reading some of the contributors and just thinking about it, and right now there's a serious overlap of Christian nationalism in our society and the conspiracy theory stuff. Often these things are kind of integrated, and so I think that's part of the problem as well. And both of them, I would argue, and again, it's just me speculating, but from what others have said that know more about this, it is a human response, right? There's a fear, and just to be candid, white conservative Christians in many ways still do and have had a lot of political and economic control over the centuries. And they see that in some ways going away. And so the church in America is not we're used to being the church of the nation, not the church, under an empire like Paul had to deal with. So I think a lot of that stuff's part of it. And it's worth just asking ourselves some hard questions, wherever we come down on this stuff.
Yeah, has any of your guys's research, ever intersected with like the New Apostolic Reformation movement, or have you guys ever heard of that term before?
Yeah, a friend of mine is a professor at Biola. I just retired, but he's got 3 books that he's co-written on that, and so I'm a little aware of it a little bit. That there's that NAR or NAR. I can't remember how they say
Yeah.
there is the nationalism and conspiracy theory stuff. So he and I have been dialoguing some about that. Not everybody in it, but it looks like there's a big sort of overlap. You draw those Venn diagrams. There's a big chunk of those, including some of the leaders
Yes.
of that movement, from my understanding.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is. We've had many conversations, several now. If you guys are interested, there's a professor named Andre Gagnier. or something. I always get it wrong, but what is it?
It's probably
Do you know well?
Gagnier.
Gagnier.
Yeah.
He's in Vancouver. No, Quebec. Anyway, Montreal. He speaks French. That's why I should remember all this. But anyway, that would be a great person to connect with. We have we did a episode with him, so it was really cool. And I want to dig in a little bit to your specific contributions and how you feel like they help us without giving away more than you want or whatever. I don't want to give it all away, too much. But just what did you learn as you did your own research for your own article? And we can start with you, Greg, and then jump over to you, Mike, when you're done, Greg. But what did you learn about conspiracy theories and anger and how that relates to how we live in this political world of ours?
Well, my research on anger goes back a few years, but I was expecting to probably find something a little more specific to conclude with regard to conspiracy theorists and the level of anger they have. But I found that anger is just a human problem. I mean, people believe things very strongly. And when you've got, like Mike was saying, fear wrapped up in it, then you get anger. And so I think what we saw on January 6th and in other situations is just, being traced back to this type of fear and anger. But my concern in my chapter, and I'm hoping, and there are several chapters that this theme comes out in, I'm hoping that part of the message is that we Christians can't forget the greatest commandment, which is to love our neighbor and love our enemies. So whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, I think I'm concerned about division in the church. That's part of my chapter as well, that we need to respect one another. When somebody comes along and sits next to us in the pew and starts spouting conspiracy theories, the first response shouldn't be dismissal, right? It shouldn't be contempt. It should be as the authors say in the first chapter, is to listen and to express praise for what they've got right. Like, oh, you're really concerned about our nation, or whatever it is that you're really concerned about. Good for you. And then the third response is to press in, is to probe, is to start asking questions. Where I find most of the non-conspiracy theorists in the church that are my friends, their response is often just dismissal. It's like contempt. I don't want to talk to those people, right? That's not respect. That's not love. And so I'm hoping that part of the message that comes out in this book is to really encourage us to reconcile in the church over these things and treat each other with respect and press in and try to get this conversation going. I know that's going to be hard with some people on both sides. At the same time, I think there's hope in that.
So you felt like, just real quick, Greg, that the anger that you saw with conspiracy theorists, those who believe something very strongly, like politically, or like something that could be defined as a conspiracy, that was not any different than any of the anger that might drive anyone else's political views? Is that kind of a fair way to say it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there's lots of people, you can hold strong political views without being angry, but you can find people who hold mainstream views politically and are angry, right?
Yes. Yes, you definitely can. I think I've met a few. Just a couple, though. That's it. Mike, what about you, man? Humility. What did you learn about humility and conspiracy theories? That conspiracy theorists aren't very humble?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And as I said earlier, so are a lot of the skeptics about these things have that, it's like Greg said, it's a human problem. Humility is a difficult thing. I've been working, for 15 years now, writing and researching it as a virtue and then as a more particular Christian virtue. But I think what struck me is that, I wanted to write something I knew about well. Can't talk today. I don't know what it is. Need more coffee, but knew a lot about and apply to this. And so what I came up with, is it is a failure of humility often because we're fallible, right? As human beings, and including as knowers, right? As people who are trying to come to know things, we are fallible. And I think a lot of times with conspiracy theories, and it goes into other things outside of conspiracy theories, just our quest for knowledge, we're not comfortable with our human limits, right? And that, when that's why you can't just quote, what people say, quote unquote, do your own research. Well, yeah, you can do your own research, but if time after time when I do my research, I'm landing on some conspiracy theory, or if I'm landing against the consensus or even the like broad consensus of experts in whatever realm I'm doing my research, that's a red flag, especially if those conclusions are always things that line up with what I already believe politically or theologically, right? So that there's evidence that there's an issue going there. And I just think we just need to say, I don't know more than we do, being willing to suspend judgment about things. And I'm not saying never believe anything, but, a acquaintance of mine was kind of thought a lot about the conspiracy stuff with the 2020 election, would send me videos and things like that. And so I began with like sort of Greg's attitude, not dismissing him because this person was a friend. We're just like, there's no way, right? But then I watched a couple of them, and then I did some of the, look at explanations, and I thought they're really good explanations dismissing this stuff. And look, there's a verse in the Bible that people have quoted, God will lead us into all truth. Well, that's, yeah, but not, I don't think all means, the context he's talking about, the Spirit guiding us into truth and the kingdom of God. I mean, I could claim God wants to lead me to the knowledge of what's the most fundamental thing in the universe, right? Is it atoms, strings, quarks? And I mean, it's not going to happen, right? I can spend the rest of my life reading about high level physics. I'm not going to come to know it. It's beyond my ability. So I just think we have to be comfortable with those limits. And I think too, it's an issue of the humility led me to think it can sometimes be an issue of faith, right? There's uncertainty, distrust in institutions, political instability, power shifts in our society, economic changes where, it's not like a couple generations ago where you could graduate high school, get a job in the factory, get a pension, be set for life. Things are just more difficult. And so we want to get control back. But part of humility is realizing we don't have control, right? We can't, there are things we can't control in life. So to me, it came to that where it's like, got to be comfortable with our human limits and entrust ourselves to God. Humility leads to faith and ultimately to loving God and loving our neighbors is the idea. And I think that, I mean, look, gossip and slander, right? Those are still sins in the Bible. And so if we just jump on whether it's claims about Hillary Clinton or Tom Hanks or my next door neighbor, whatever it is, the conspiracy theories can lead us to those things. And that's something that's concerning. And in the church as well, right? I can slander or gossip about the guy that sits next to me that's a QAnon enthusiast, right? So yeah, that was the gist.
Yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts, Mike, about trust, because you sort of alluded a little bit to it in your comment just now, but it seems as if the biggest issue that Christians, especially the Christians that are kind of predisposed to believing conspiracy theories, is trust. So whether it's vaccinations or results of the 2020 election, no amount of information or facts will instill the level of trust to change their thinking. So, maybe you can talk a little bit about, like how do we solve that? Like, how do we break through this barrier that people have where facts and information just don't really affect how they think?
Yeah, that's so difficult. And that's part of the problem we have in our nation right now, that lack of trust. I think one thing I'd want to center on with people and I have these conversations would be about publicly available evidence, right? So not just trust me, but like, I mean, if we're going to be in a society where there's the rule of law, then that publicly available evidence is going to be important, whether it's about the election or whatever. And it's tough. You got to go on a case by case basis on these issues, right? And so if it's someone you've got a relationship with, I might say, all right, so give me your best argument that that the vaccines are ineffective or there's something bad about them or the 2020, whatever it is. And then I'll do the same and we can discuss it and like go point by point. I think sometimes if we actually, and this is kind of what Greg's alluded to earlier, I've found whether it's online or in person, if I just relate to someone in a non-confrontational way, if I can, the Holy Spirit can sort of generate some genuine, compassionate curiosity in me, people, and then I instead of looking ourselves like face to face, we're opposed to each other, someone's going to win this argument. we're at more like side by side, shoulder to shoulder, looking together, trying to figure out what's true together. I think that can help. But yeah, as far as reestablishing trust, that's a difficult one because our institutions, I mean, they do fail us, right? They're imperfect, they're fallen. And so, but man, I mean, compared to a lot of places in the planet, they do a pretty good job. Like, I'm not worried about I'm fortunate because there are people in the US that aren't like that, but I'm not worried about my physical security or my health today. So I'm very fortunate. Um, and we need to make that the case for everybody in our country.
Can I answer that question too?
Yeah, please do.
I think the responsibility is two-sided. I think it's on us, it's on the people in the church to be more careful thinkers, to cultivate these intellectual virtues we've been talking about. But I also think it's on the side of the institutions as well. I watched a TED Talk a while back by the philosopher Honora O'Neill, and it's probably still up. That you probably look it up. But she's it was addressed. It was titled Trust or Distrust or something like that. And her conclusion wasn't that we need to be more careful thinkers. Her conclusion was that the institutions need to garner more trust, need to prove their trust to us. And that struck me as an important part that we often leave out.
Wow.
We just blindly, well, we don't, not necessarily blindly, but we trust the institutions because we understand that many of us are on the inside of those institutions. We see how they work. We know they're not perfect. But at the same time, they could be more transparent. There are ways in which our institutions have let us down. And so I think we can take this as a learning opportunity and reform our institutions. That's the one side. At the same time, we need to work in the church and with our friends and family and talk about like how do we think carefully about these things. This is where I think Christian philosophers in general, can be a great help in the classroom or in society, helping us think more carefully about things, thinking critically about the claims that are being made.
Yeah, I think those are really really good tips that I hope more people would consider. I mean, I know for my own personal journey. So our podcast is intentionally set up where I'm sort of the token liberal progressive, and Josh is the token pastor conservative. And under normal circumstances, like him and I probably would never really be friends or talk to each other. But like in my experience, talking to people that differ, in thought, philosophy, faith, I have found that, this is going to sound like a very pastorly sort of like phrase, but you can't have revelation without relationship. So, establishing kind of like just that friendship with people, and asking them questions that are non-threatening or accusatorial about the things that they believe, really plays a big part in at least sort of my journey as a Christian and trying to better understand where people are coming from. But go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's really well said, Will. And the kind of both of the things that you guys have even been talking about, anger and humility, have such a huge part of how we interact with our neighbors, our loved ones. And it's amazing to me, the more angry I get, the less humble I am. And there's definitely this correlation I find, that my humility tends to go out the door when I'm gearing up in anger, or I feel like I'm being attacked. Or so what I would love, like, and again, like, we can start with you, Greg, jump over to Mike. When you're like, okay, here's a scenario. Someone comes up to me, like you said, your friend, or I'll tell you about it. Yeah, they say, I believe in lizard people. Well, let's not get that extreme. I think that there's a pedophilic ring. I know that's extreme, but let's believe there's a pedophilic ring that's being hidden, and I believe that. And I also believe that they're creating concentration camps to put conservatives in. That's what Biden's doing. That's what Obama started, and now Biden is picking up where Obama left off. These are things I've heard. And so they're making these, concentration camps, and they're in Wisconsin, where you can't see anything. and nobody like in the wilderness, and nobody's going to be able to find you or whatever. So these kinds of things have happened in the past. That's why I went from lizard people to this. These kind of things have happened in the past, right? There's been secret police. I'm reading a book right now that's talking about Chile in the 80s and 70s under Pinochet. I don't know how to say Pinochet. I don't know how to say his name, but I'm sure I just totally butchered it. But he was this general, and they used torture to keep their citizens, like so many of them, in line. And the church, didn't take a big stand at first, and then it did, and there's this fight. So my point is that these kinds of things happen, they happen, but my neighbor is saying it to me. Greg, how do I approach that conversation? And he's very convinced. It's my friend. He's very convinced. He's like, you don't know about this? What, how do I respond?
Good. I'll do the first step, and maybe Mike can step in. But the first step, I think, is to attend to the friendship. I think you probably already know where the conversation is going. Maybe you've already had a conversation like this in the past with this friend. But attend to the friendship, because you don't want, and maybe you've got history, right? Maybe this has turned into a debate where you've walked away from one another angry, or you're resentful towards how that went. You want your friend to know that you love him, right? You want that should be your goal. A friend of mine told me once, when you enter into a debate with somebody, it shouldn't be like to win the debate. That shouldn't be your goal. Your goal as a Christian should be to love that person and to communicate that love to that person. So if I get into a conversation with one of my friends who believe these things, and I sense it's already getting heated, I'm going to stop. I'm going to back up and say, you know what, friend, if we may not agree at the end of the day or the end of this conversation, but I care about you, right? And that really helps dissolve the tension. That really helps bring us back to reality. And usually if this is a good friend, they're going, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. Of course I feel that way. And then you can proceed in a very fun conversation. I mean, you can be open-minded and humble, and you can search out the evidence and all that entails. But first, you got to have the foundation right. You got to attend to that. Mike, did you want to add to that?
That's so good. Attend to the friendship. Step number 1. Mike, what's step number 2?
Yeah, I think step number 2 then would be, we've already alluded to, asking just why. So what's led you to believe this? What's some of the evidence you have, those kind of things. And yeah, just let your friend make their case. Without, and the temptation might be jump in and try to refute every single point, but just
is that where
let them lay it out.
Comes in? You suspend
judgment?
Humility. Is that where?
Yeah, for sure. There's a humility there. There's a patience there, right? That, because we just want to jump in and say our stuff, right? That's just even in non-controversial things, right?
Especially if it feels ridiculous, right? Especially if it feels ridiculous. We just want to, we have to bite our tongue kind of thing. So in the bite the tongue conversations, you let them lay it out. That's what you do. And then what?
Because you love that person, because you care about that person, right?
Right. Yeah. Totally.
That's right.
That's an act of humility.
So then I think you might, there are a couple of different chapters give some different processes to do this, but I think a good next step would be asking some questions, right? About the sources, or about, maybe even ask them, instead of you giving an argument, ask them, what's the best sort of counter argument to this stuff that you've heard? Make them kind of step into the other side a little bit. And then if I had information, I might say, well, can I just share one thing I think that's a problem with what you've said, rather than just a barrage, so in that one key point. And then, maybe ask to continue the conversation. So maybe, say, look, some of the stuff I've heard of, some I haven't, I'd like to go, look at some of the things that you have shared. And then maybe I'd like to share some things that I've found with you, and kind of if there's not a mutuality of if they're not willing to listen to what you have to say or read something that you asked them to read, and you're doing that for them, I'm not sure where you go from there, except for maybe tabling it for a while until, and maybe praying that God would enable that kind of conversation to happen. Because for me, some of these experiences, and these aren't really with friends, there's others on some issues, including this, when I can tell that there's not really a good faith, hey, let's work on this together, then it does seem kind of like a waste of time. Doesn't mean I cut them off, but I just put a pin in this discussion and maybe try to revisit it at a later time.
Right. That's brilliant. I love that. Greg, is there anything you'd add on top of that?
No, I think you got to remain open-minded. One of the things I've learned through doing this project is it's not so simple. There, like some conspiracy theories, as we've talked about, turn out to be true. Watergate's the standard example, right? So
Yeah.
they're not all false. I mean, we're concerned with false ones in the book, but sometimes when somebody brings something up, and you have a temptation just to dismiss it because it sounds like, oh, just another conspiracy theory. Well, when you're open-minded and you press into the evidence, you might actually find there's something to it.
Yeah. And at a minimum, I think you can figure out that it just helps you become a better discerner of people, an understander of people. I know that's kind of a weird way to say it, but you better learn how to just, because people feel things for a reason. They believe things for a reason. It's not out of a vacuum. They're believing this because something happened or something convinced them, or someone they knew in the past, was this way, and they got hurt and they never wanted to do that again. So they have their reasons. It's very logical from their viewpoint, but it's like exposing. It's like accepting it and then for what it is, and then gently like prodding and almost exposing the other person's unwillingness to listen if they are unwilling to listen. Like if you will read something they ask you to read, say, hey, would you mind reading this? And they won't do it. I think the more it kind of just exposes, like, oh, wow, I'm not very willing to listen to anyone else's viewpoint. So I think these kind of conversations are super important that we need to keep pushing and having, even though they're really hard. They're really hard. To end out, well, Mike, and we'll start with you, but this is kind of the last question. You can incorporate. I think you were just about to say something. You should incorporate that into it. That'd be awesome. And you could probably easily do it into this question, is what's the lesson? What if you were to boil it down to one or two lessons from your work that you would want to share with an audience that we have that's fairly wide? We have liberals and conservatives, atheists, Christians, people of different religions, Muslims, Hindus, people just all over a global audience. So what is the lesson that you would want to say?
Yeah, so I think the thing I was thinking of with that, when you're having that discussion with somebody, I think a good question to ask after you've had a series of conversations might be to ask that person, what's one thing that would make you change your mind about this, right? Because take QAnon, there have been predictions that have not happened, things like that, and turn that back on me as a Christian, right? What if it was like proven beyond a shadow of doubt Jesus didn't rise from the dead? Well, that's the linchpin of my faith, right? And so that would be something. But I think that question is a good one to ask. Getting people to think critically, and me as well. Yeah, the big picture lesson I think for that broad of an audience is that this stuff this stuff is more prevalent. Like even if you don't know anybody, there's a lot of evidence that a significant number of Americans, both religious especially, but also non-religious, or maybe they're just kind of religious nominally but not really practicing, believe this stuff, and then like they're living their lives, they're spending a lot of time on it. And so I think most of us, Christians, we've got the golden rule: love your neighbors, as you love yourself. You can find similar teachings in world religions, and you just want to be like a decent human being who doesn't believe in God, right? Caring for other people is just a basic human moral value. So for me, it's like the lesson is, let's let that guide how we deal, not with just the issues, but the people that we're interacting with about them. Because then a lot of the anger, the vitriol, the polarization, it goes away, and we start like actually connecting with other human beings in our lives. Then I think that can be really valuable and helpful.
That's so good. That's so good. Greg, what about you?
Yeah, I think the polarization is a big concern at the wider society as a whole. We're so polarized right now. We're not talking to one another. We're hunkering down in our bunkers and we're just voting. We're just voting how we want the other person to behave. We're coercing the other side, right?
Mail
And I,
voting. voting by mail.
Right, by mail
That's
from our
what we were
bunkers.
doing.
Yeah, and I think it's just unhealthy. I think it's not good for our society. We need to be in dialogue. There needs to be an increased amount of civil discourse in our society. We've lost those values, those virtues. So that's as a whole, I think that's the concern. In the church, I'm concerned about division in the church. I'm concerned about how we're loving one another in the church, and I think that's hopefully is communicated through this book in ways to we can do that better.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much, both Greg and Mike,
thank
guys.
you.
Thank you for coming on. And the book is QAnon, Chaos and the Cross. You can get it wherever books are sold, I assume, at least in America. I mean, you can get it on Amazon, you know, so anyone else that can get that. So, guys, we really appreciate it. If anyone wanted to follow you, are you guys on Twitter? Or what, do you have anything you'd want to share along those lines?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Michael W. Austin. And then I've got a website with that as well. It's got some of my other stuff. So if people want to connect there, that's probably the best way.
I don't have
Michael
much of
W.
a social
Austin.
media presence, or maybe I'll have to change that soon. But
Maybe
it's okay.
maybe Greg's
No worries.
wiser than the rest of us.
Probably.
Or happier. We'll take that.
Yeah.
Right?
right.
That's right.
That's good. Well, thank you so much, guys. And
Yeah, thank you.
we'll see you next time. And till then, God bless.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.